You know, Mom, he said, wiping sweat from his forehead. Why pay a builder when we've got you doing all this for free? He grinned like it was a joke, but it wasn't. Not really. I didn't laugh. The brush in my hand hovered midair. I'd been repainting the fence since morning, leaning on my left knee, back aching from the effort. It was over 90 degrees out, and I hadn't sat down in hours. But apparently, the sight of his 80-year-old mother bent over wood slats in the heat was something amusing to my only child. Scott, I said quietly, either help me or go back to your air conditioning. He chuckled and raised his hands in surrender. Okay, don't bite my head off. Then, after a pause, added, but seriously, we need to talk about the porch. It's rotting through, and I've got a friend who could tear it down. Or, he gestured toward me, smirking, you could keep going. You've got the touch. He said that like it was a compliment, like I hadn't just spent 3 hours scraping paint with arthritis in my wrists. I stood up slowly, testing my knees. They creaked in protest. What are you talking about now? The porch, he repeated, and maybe the roof. And we should replace the siding while we're at it. The place needs a full refresh, Mom. You know it does. I looked at him. His t-shirt was spotless, not a drop of paint, not a trace of dirt on his soft hands. We? Scott waved his phone toward the house. It's your home, but it reflects on the family. You don't want it to look run down. Think of resale value down the road. That last part caught me. Resale value? What resale? I wasn't selling this house. This was my home. The house I'd moved into with Walter when I was 24. The one where Scott had taken his first steps, where I'd planted peonies in the front yard every spring. The idea of resale hadn't crossed my mind once in 56 years. I don't need a new roof, I said. He leaned on the gate, still smiling. You will, eventually. And it's easier to do it now before it starts leaking. I'm just thinking ahead. He'd always been good at that, thinking ahead, especially when it came to other people's money or labor. I can call a few people, he went on, get some estimates. But honestly, with what you've already done on the fence, I bet you could handle most of it. We'd just pay for materials. I wiped sweat from my temple and looked away. A wind picked up just then, carrying the smell of the neighbor's barbecue, the smell of someone else's ease. When you say we, I asked, who exactly do you mean? Me and Britt, of course. He said it like it was obvious. We're just trying to help. I nodded slowly. Help. He didn't catch the tone. Tell you what. Let me run the numbers and I'll stop by later with a plan. Britt wants to swing by anyway and talk about paint colors. Paint colors? For the exterior. It's time for a real update, Mom. You've done the hard part. Just a few more projects, and this place'll look like something out of a magazine. He left soon after, promising to text me ideas. As he drove off in that shiny black SUV of his, the one I helped make the down payment for, I stood in my yard, holding the paintbrush like it was something foreign. The wood was still only half painted. My legs were trembling. When I finally sat on the porch steps, they groaned beneath me. Just like my knees. Just like every part of me that had been useful for too long and appreciated for too little. He'd said it again like it was nothing. Why pay a builder when Mom's free labor? The plan arrived that evening in the form of a bulleted list sent by text. Week 1, porch demolition. Week 2, new boards. Week 3, siding touch-up. Week 4, roof inspection. Scott even added a little thumbs-up emoji at the end, like he was sending out a weekend potluck invite instead of assigning unpaid labor to his elderly mother. Brittany called not long after. "Just wanted to check if you had the paint samples, Virginia. I left them by the back door." I hadn't seen them. "Well," she continued, "Ukesh, we thought a light gray would really modernize the look. Plus, it'll tie in with the aesthetic of the new neighborhood." I nearly asked what new neighborhood she was talking about, but held my tongue. Brittany had a way of saying too much and nothing at all, and I wasn't in the mood for word games. "I haven't agreed to anything," I said instead. "Oh." She paused. "Scott said you were already on board." "Of course he did." "Well," I repeated, "I haven't." Another pause, this one sharper. Then her voice turned sugary. "It's just, you've already done so much. And I know Scott really appreciates it. He said you even fixed the fence in that heat wave. You're amazing, honestly." Amazing, right. By the end of the call, I still hadn't agreed to anything. But the next morning, 2 bags of cement and a bundle of wood planks appeared in my driveway. No note, no explanation, just dropped there like groceries. I didn't even hear the delivery. I called Scott. No answer. By noon, I'd started the porch demolition. Don't ask me why. Maybe it was the sight of that sagging step I'd been meaning to replace for years. Maybe it was stubborn pride. Maybe it was the fact that if I didn't do it, I knew no one else would. Not him, not her. I pulled out my old crowbar from the shed, bent over in the sun, one board at a time, the sound of nails groaning loose, wood splitting like dry bone. By evening, I'd filled 2 wheelbarrows with debris. No one came by to help. That became the rhythm. Mornings on the porch, afternoons dragging lumber, evenings icing my knees and soaking my hands. I hadn't worked that hard since the year Walter died, when I built a new fence after the old one blew down in the storm. Back then, Scott was 16. He'd handed me tools, asked questions, watched me closely. I remember thinking he'd grow up to be the kind of man who knew the value of work. But somewhere along the way, that version of him vanished. On the 4th day, I got a voicemail. "Hey, Mom, just checking in. Britt says everything's looking great. We might swing by this weekend with the kids, show them how Grandma builds houses." He laughed. "Anyway, let me know if you need anything. Oh, and can you measure the window frames too? We're thinking shutters could be cute." I replayed the message twice, the tone of it, like I was the contractor or the babysitter. Not once did he ask if I was tired, or sore, or even willing. That night, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, too tired to lift the mug properly. The planks were in place, the supports were done. It wasn't perfect, but it was solid, better than it had been in years, and I'd done it alone. A soft breeze stirred the hem of my nightdress. The wind chimes clinked above. The stars were just coming out, and I could feel the ache in every joint. It wasn't just the labor, it was the loneliness in it. Walter would have been proud, I thought. But he would have also told me to sit down and let someone else carry the weight for once. I hadn't done that in decades. I went inside and sat at the kitchen table, still dusty from the day's work. Pulled out a folder from the drawer, the one with the bills, old letters, property papers. Somewhere in there was the deed, and tucked in the back, still folded like a grocery list, was the power of attorney form Scott had brought me a year ago. "Just in case something happens," he'd said. I hadn't looked at it since. Now, under the kitchen light, I unfolded it and read every word, and felt something in my chest start to tighten. The paper trembled in my hand, but not from weakness. I read it 3 times to be sure, running my finger along the lines as if tracing the shape of betrayal. I had signed it. That much was clear. Scott had left a sticky note on the front when he first gave it to me. For emergencies only. Love you. With a little heart drawn next to his name, like I was still the mother who packed his lunch and not the woman funding his ambition by accident. Power of attorney. Full financial authority in case of incapacitation. I remembered the day he brought it. I was tired after a dental appointment, still numb from the Novocaine, my cheeks swollen. Just something to have on file, he'd said. Standard stuff. And I'd signed it. I sat at the table for a long time, staring at the document. Outside, the wind picked up, and something knocked against the side of the house. A loose shutter, maybe, or a message I didn't want to hear. What else had I signed? I got up, went to the metal box in the hall closet. The one Walter had called our home vault. In it were all the papers that mattered. The deed, the will, insurance, tax records, the checkbook I hadn't used in over a year because Brittany had set up everything online for me. And there it was, a copy of a new mortgage agreement, dated 3 months ago. My name was on it. I wasn't selling the house, but someone was leveraging it. I sat back down, documents spread around me like fallen leaves. The kitchen was dark now, except for the overhead light buzzing faintly above. The house creaked with the tired sighs of age, but it was still my house. I had raised a son in it, buried a husband, scrubbed every corner and painted every wall. The thought of it being treated like an asset, a property to squeeze dry, made something ancient and furious rise in me. I didn't sleep that night. Just watched the shadows shift across the living room walls, listened to the quiet hum of appliances and the loud echo of thoughts. By morning, I had made a list. Things I'd paid for in the last 10 years. Scott's first condo, down payment, $20,000. Brittany's graduate program, a career investment. The SUV, it's for the kids' safety. Summer camps, school fees, kitchen remodel, medical bills after Scott lost his job for 3 months. Anniversary trip to the Keys. Mom, it's just a little help. We'll pay you back. They never did. I remembered Walter once saying, kindness without limits becomes currency. I hadn't understood him then. I thought love was shown through giving, but I saw now. I had handed them tools, and they'd built a life where I was the foundation, but not the welcome guest. Late that afternoon, Brittany showed up unannounced, holding a color swatch in one hand and a caramel iced latte in the other. Hi, Virginia. Thought I'd stop by and see the progress. Wow, the porch looks amazing. Scott said you even did the railing? I nodded. My hands were still swollen. My back still throbbed. We're thinking of doing charcoal gray for the shutters, she said, not waiting for input. Something sleek, clean lines, really give it curb appeal. Curb appeal for what? I asked. She blinked. Well, you know, just keeping things fresh. No one's selling, I said flatly. Her smile faltered. Of course not. No, of course not. Just future-proofing. She prattled on for 10 more minutes about real estate trends, her cousin's renovation, how paint finishes affected resale. I heard the words, but not the meaning. I watched her like I was seeing her for the first time. A polite, efficient woman, always composed, always flattering, but with eyes that flicked around the room like she was counting items in it. When she finally left, latte barely touched, she called over her shoulder. Scott's coming by tomorrow to talk through the roof plans. He says you'll love what he's come up with. I stood on the porch alone, watching her drive away. and I knew. Whatever he was planning, I wasn't part of it. Not as a person, just as the one holding the deed. Scott arrived the next morning with blueprints. Not architectural ones. Nothing that formal. Just a sketch pad, curled at the edges, with lines drawn in pencil and a few boxes labeled New Roofline and Extended Deck. He spread it across my kitchen table like we were equals in some collaborative project. Not a son explaining to his 80-year-old mother how her house, her only security, would soon be transformed. For resale value, he said again, tapping the page with a chewed-up pen. And honestly, Mom, this place could be worth so much more if you just let go of the, old lady aesthetic. He said it with a smile. A rehearsed, cheerful sort of smile that he probably used on clients. I didn't smile back. I don't need a deck, I said. Sure you do, he said. Think about it. We extend it. Put in some outdoor seating, maybe even a little pergola. It adds charm. He said we, the same way a dentist says, we're just going to numb you up a little right before jabbing the needle. I folded my hands on the table. And what exactly do you plan to do with all this charm? He hesitated. Just thinking long term, that's all. That's funny, I said. Because long term, I'm the one who'll be living here, not you. Scott leaned back in his chair. You're being combative, Mom. I'm just trying to help. There it was again. That word. Help. The same word Brittany had used, the same word that got attached to every unsolicited suggestion, every plan I hadn't asked for. Help didn't come with strings. This did. You forged my name, I said quietly, sliding the copy of the mortgage across the table. His face changed. I didn't forge anything, he said quickly, voice tightening. You signed it. I didn't know what I was signing. You didn't ask. I trusted you. He looked away then, like he was suddenly interested in the blinds. The silence stretched. I needed collateral, he finally said. We're in a tight spot. I let out a breath. So you used the only thing I own, without telling me. It's still in your name, he said. Legally. Is that supposed to comfort me? His jaw tightened. You're overreacting. No, I said, standing. I'm finally reacting. There's a difference. I walked to the sink, needing the distance, the cold touch of the faucet handle, the grounding sound of water. Behind me, his chair scraped against the floor. You know what your problem is? He said. You don't understand how much pressure we're under. 2 kids, 2 jobs, the mortgage. My house's mortgage, I corrected. He waved that off. We're just trying to keep things afloat. And I've been the life raft, I said, turning to face him. For how many years, Scott? 15? 20? Every time you needed a boost, I gave it. Every time you wanted something you couldn't afford, I made it happen. And you didn't even have the decency to ask this time. You just assumed I'd go along. He had no answer. I stepped closer. My hands were still damp, the towel cold against my fingers. You look at me and see someone who can't say no, someone old who's lucky to be included. But I've had more spine in me than you've ever bothered to notice. Scott looked stunned, as if the words hit a place he didn't know existed. I kept going. You think because I have gray hair and live alone that I'm helpless. But I built a life here, son. I didn't coast into it. I scrubbed floors and patched walls and worked overtime shifts to keep this house and to raise you while your father was dying. He shifted, uncomfortable. You don't get to come in here with your blueprints and your charm and your lies and treat me like a stepping stone. I am not your project. Scott picked up the papers, folded them too quickly. I should go, he muttered. You should, I said, and take those with you. He stopped in the doorway, one hand on the knob. You know, he said, turning halfway, you always act like the martyr, like you're the only one who's ever struggled. No, I said. I just learned not to pass my struggles on to other people. He left. The door clicked shut behind him like the punctuation on a sentence I'd waited years to finish. The next morning, I found a flyer tucked under my doormat. Bold font, glossy paper, some smiling woman in a blazer. Sell your home as is, fast closings, fair offers. I almost laughed. Almost. I knew where it came from. I knew who had sent it. Scott didn't even try to be subtle anymore. I poured myself a cup of tea and stood by the window, watching a squirrel dart along the fence I'd painted last week. The air smelled like cut grass and dry wood. Early summer. Always my favorite. When I looked back at the table, that flyer was still there, like a little insult folded in 4 colors. That afternoon, Marlene stopped by, my neighbor of 40 years. She brought fresh peaches from the market and a look I'd seen before. The one that said, I know something, and I'm not sure if I should say it. She didn't sit long, just placed the bag on the table and hesitated near the door. You know, Ginny, she said, using the name only people from the old days still used. I was talking to Ed, the notary. Said he saw your boy come in a while back with some paperwork. I kept my expression still. What kind of paperwork? Real estate stuff. Ed didn't say more, but your name came up. I smiled politely, thanked her for the peaches, and closed the door gently when she left. Then I stood there, hand still on the knob, until the kettle whistled behind me. He'd gone to the notary. Again. When? What else? I dug through the drawer by the fridge, the one that held coupons, expired warranties, and a growing stack of things I couldn't ignore anymore. And there it was. An envelope I hadn't opened, marked with a lawyer's return address. Postmarked 2 weeks ago. Inside, a copy of a shared ownership form. My name, Scott's name, the house. A note about partial title transfer for financial security purposes. I didn't remember signing that, but the signature was there. Mine. Tidy, careful, real. I sat down hard. The chair creaked under me. I thought back. 2 months ago, maybe 3. Scott had come by with a stack of papers. Said they were for tax exemptions, some senior property credit he was filing on my behalf. He'd distracted me with questions about my doctor's appointment, joked about how hard it was to read government forms. I'd signed the bottom page without looking through the rest. Of course I had. My mouth went dry. Outside, the breeze shifted, and the fence rattled softly. It used to comfort me, that sound, the way the old house made itself known. But now it felt like something else. A warning, or maybe a question. How much of this was mine anymore? I spent the rest of the day pulling every document I could find. Mortgage, utilities. The insurance policy Walter and I had taken out in 1974. Some things were faded from age, others newer and far too slick, like the digital statements Scott had offered to simplify for me. I was starting to see the picture. The slow erosion of ownership masked as assistance, the debt that wasn't mine, the control I hadn't noticed slipping from my hands. By nightfall, I'd filled 2 folders. I sat in the living room, staring at them like they were evidence in a trial. Maybe they were. The house was quiet. No television, no music. Just the creak of floorboards and the old clock ticking beside the mantel. I looked at the photograph on the shelf. Walter in his flannel, me in a denim jacket, Scott between us, maybe 7 years old, grinning like the world belonged to him. And maybe it had. But it didn't now. I stood up, my knees stiff but steady, and carried the folders to the hall closet, slid them into the tote bag I used for errands, laid out tomorrow's clothes, a neat blouse, ironed slacks, flat shoes. Then I wrote one note on a clean sheet of paper. Appointment, 10 a.m., Davis and Frayne Legal. Bring all documents. I left it on the kitchen table, under the peaches. In the morning, I would take back what was mine. The law office of Davis and Frayne hadn't changed in the 30 years since Walter and I first stepped through its doors to draft our wills. Same green carpet, same over-polished wood paneling, same dusty fern in the corner that looked just barely alive. The receptionist was new, of course, a young girl with bright nails and too much lip gloss, but she greeted me kindly and offered me water I didn't take. "Mr. Frayne will be with you shortly, Mrs. Price." I nodded and sat on the same worn leather sofa I'd waited on with Walter decades ago. Back then, we were finalizing guardianship papers in case something ever happened to us. Just in case. We never expected anything would. But Walter was gone by 59, and the world never gave me the time to catch up. A door creaked open. Virginia. Harold Frayne still had that slow, heavy voice I remembered, the kind that made you feel like every word mattered. He looked older now, of course. White hair, thick glasses. But his presence hadn't changed. He offered his hand, warm and steady. I followed him into his office, past shelves crammed with legal books no one had opened since the Bush administration. "What brings you in today?" he asked as he sat behind the big oak desk. I opened the tote bag and laid the folders on the desk, one by one. I didn't speak until they were all there, neatly stacked between us like bricks in a wall. "I think my son is trying to take my house," I said. Harold didn't flinch. He only nodded, reached for his reading glasses, and opened the first folder. I told him everything. Not the emotional parts, not how tired I was, not how hurt, just the facts. The signatures I didn't remember giving, the mortgage I never wanted, the sudden appearance of realtors' flyers and discussions about curb appeal. His pen moved slowly across the notepad as I spoke. When I finished, he looked up. "You're not the first parent I've seen walk through that door, Virginia, but you might be the calmest." "I've had time to think." "And you still want to move forward?" "I do." "All right." He began to list steps. First, we revoke the power of attorney. Then we dispute the partial title transfer. There's room to argue undue influence, especially given your age and lack of clear consent. I'll need to see any correspondence you've had with Scott. Texts. Emails. "I printed them," I said, handing over a slim envelope. He nodded approvingly. "Next," he continued, "we'll put a protective clause on the property, essentially a legal freeze, so it can't be sold or leveraged without your explicit, notarized permission. We can draft a new will, if you'd like." I hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, I want to change everything." "Do you have someone in mind for executor?" I thought of Marlene, steady and sharp even at 77, who'd never once asked me for anything but had shown up with peaches and quiet concern. "My neighbor, Marlene Crosby." "Perfect," Harold said, already writing. Now, the trust. He explained how we could place the house and my savings into a living trust with terms that protected it from external manipulation, especially from family members who'd shown poor judgment. You'll retain control while you're living. Afterward, it goes to the beneficiaries you name. Not Scott, I said. Not Brittany, and not their plans. He looked up, meeting my eyes. That's entirely your right. We spent 2 hours going through everything. By the end, my hand ached from signing and initialing and confirming. But I felt no fatigue, only clarity. As I stood to leave, Harold placed his hand gently on my arm. You're doing the right thing, Virginia, even if it doesn't feel like it now. It feels fine, I said. It finally feels fine. Outside, the sun was high, the sidewalk warm under my shoes. I didn't walk to the bus stop. I walked 3 blocks to the bakery Walter used to love, the one with the little green awning and the sour cherry pie. I bought a slice and sat at the window, not because I needed a treat, but because I'd earned it. I spent the next week finishing the house, not for Scott, not for Brittany, and not because I believed in their vision of curb appeal. I did it because it was mine. Each morning, I woke before the sun crested the hill behind the maple trees, pulled on the same pair of worn work pants, and walked the perimeter of the house like I was walking the border of something sacred. My sanctuary, my history, my fight. I patched the last section of siding, recaulked the window trims. On Thursday, I climbed onto the garage roof, slowly, carefully, one rung at a time, and cleared the gutters by hand, tossing down clumps of dead leaves that had probably been up there since the Bush administration. Every ache in my back felt earned. Every hammer strike was a sentence I couldn't say out loud. And inside me, something was setting like concrete. I didn't hear from Scott all week. Not a call, not a message, not a visit. It was the longest silence we'd had since he was 12, and ran away from home for exactly 2 hours because I wouldn't let him get a dirt bike. Back then, I'd waited on the porch, arms crossed, refusing to chase him. I knew he'd come back, that he was just testing boundaries. This silence was different. This time, I wasn't waiting. On Friday, Brittany showed up. Not alone, but with the kids. Both girls in matching dresses, clutching juice boxes, looking bored and hot. She didn't come up the walk, just stood at the edge of the driveway like a guest at a stranger's house. "Virginia?" she called out, waving one manicured hand. We were in the neighborhood and thought we'd say hi. I wiped my hands on a rag and came down the porch steps. "What do you want, Brittany?" She blinked like I'd slapped her. "Just to see how you were doing. The girls wanted to visit." The girls said nothing. I folded my arms. "Scott's been worried," she said after a pause. "He hasn't heard from you." "Scott knows how to use a phone." She smiled thinly. "He said you've been upset. That maybe there's been a misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding." I stepped closer. "Let me be clear, Brittany. I know about the documents. I know about the mortgage. I know about the signature I didn't understand." She glanced down, adjusting the strap on her purse. "Virginia, I think you're getting emotional. We were only trying to help." "No," I said. "You were trying to take." Her mouth opened, closed. "We've revoked everything, the power of attorney, the title transfer. The bank has been notified, and the house is now in a protective trust." Brittany paled. The girls looked up at her, sensing the shift. "I don't know what Scott told you," I said, "but I'm not the weak link in this family. Not anymore." She cleared her throat. "That's going to complicate things, Virginia. We're in the middle of a refinance. That's not my problem." Her voice sharpened. "You're being incredibly unfair." I let out a breath. "For 20 years I paid your bills, covered your tuition, helped raise your kids, and kept my mouth shut. If you think fairness is the issue now, then you've never understood who I am. The girls fidgeted. The sun was high and hot, and Brittany's smile was starting to peel. "We'll talk to a lawyer," she said quietly. "You'll find I already have." She turned, nudging the girls toward the car without another word. I didn't watch them go. I didn't need to. I walked back to the porch, climbed the steps I'd reinforced myself, and sat in the old wicker chair by the door. The paint was still drying along the banister. A soft gray-blue, the color Walter always said, made the house look proud. And I felt it too. Not proud like boasting, but proud like steady, proud like unshakable. I didn't need Scott's approval. I didn't need anyone's. All I needed was this chair, this porch, this quiet, and the knowledge that I had built this life with my own 2 hands and no one would take it from me again. The silence after Brittany's visit wasn't quiet. It was loud in a different way, full of tension, of waiting, not mine, theirs. I imagined them pacing their kitchen, voices low and sharp. I imagined Brittany opening her laptop again and again, checking loan statuses, balances, options. I imagined Scott rehearsing what to say, how to twist things back into sympathy, but I didn't hear from them. Instead, I got a call from Marlene. "I saw her," she said without even saying hello. "That little wife of your son's. She was at the bank, Virginia, red-faced and muttering like someone just told her Christmas was canceled." I smiled. Did she say anything? Just that she needed to unfreeze something. Sounded like she'd stepped in something and tracked it all over her own carpet. Marlene chuckled, then paused. "You all right, hun?" "I think I'm better than I've been in years." We talked a little while longer about the garden, the tomatoes, a new casserole recipe I pretended I'd try. When I hung up, I sat at the kitchen table, the sunlight falling across the paperwork still left out from my visit to Harold. There was a kind of stillness in me now I hadn't felt in a long time. I used to think stillness was loneliness. Turns out it's peace, once you clear enough of the noise. That afternoon, I baked, not out of habit or obligation, but because I wanted something warm in the house that wasn't coming from tension or heat. The cinnamon filled the air, and by evening, I had 2 apple crisps cooling on the counter. The smell made the whole house feel like memory, but a good one, not the kind that hurts. The knock at the door came just after 6. Not a ring, not a shout from the sidewalk. A knock, quiet, measured. I knew before I opened it. Scott. He stood with both hands in his pockets like a boy again. No papers, no laptop, just him. "Hi, Mom." I nodded and stepped aside. He didn't expect the invitation, I could tell, but he came in anyway, slow and cautious, like someone approaching a sleeping dog. The kitchen was warm. The apple crisps sat uncovered, steaming gently. "Smells good," he said. I didn't answer. "Just poured tea for one." He cleared his throat. "So, I heard about the lawyer." "I'm sure you did." He took a breath. "Brit's upset. I imagine she is. And I guess I am too." I turned to face him. "Because you lost control? Or because you realized you had it in the first place?" That made him blink. Then he looked down at his hands. "I don't know what to say." "Then don't say anything." We stood in silence. Then he said it. Soft. Almost like it hurt. "I wasn't trying to hurt you." I looked at him for a long time. My son. My only child. The one I raised on casseroles and coupons and sheer willpower. The boy who used to sleep with one hand curled in mine, afraid of thunder. "You didn't care if you did," I said. That's worse. His shoulders dropped. He looked older than he had last time. Tired. Edges worn down by guilt or stress or consequence. I didn't know, and I didn't ask. I miss Dad, he said suddenly. I keep thinking about him lately. So do I. I think he'd be mad at me. I sat down. No, I said. He'd be disappointed. That's worse, too. Scott stayed standing, his hand on the back of a chair he didn't pull out. I didn't know it had gotten this far. I thought we were just borrowing time. No, I said. You were stealing it from someone who had very little left. He winced, but he didn't argue. I'm sorry, he said again, quieter this time. Not just for the money, for the way I've treated you. I didn't answer. After a while, he left. Didn't ask for a slice of pie. Didn't hug me. Just walked out, slower than he came in, and I let him go. The house was quiet again. Not the aching, hollow quiet it used to be. The kind that reminded me of all the footsteps I no longer heard. The laughter that had thinned out over the years like old paint. No, this quiet was something different. It was earned. I sat on the porch, wrapped in my light cardigan, watching the breeze move through the trees. The wood beneath me was solid, new, straight, properly sealed. I had done that. My hands, my money, my time. Not for someone else's promise of gratitude. For me. The papers were all signed now. The trust filed. The power of attorney revoked. The title secured under my terms. Marlene came by the next morning, holding 2 cups of gas station coffee and a bag of pastries that had seen better days. Celebration breakfast, she declared, easing into the chair beside mine. We should toast to stubborn old women. Only if we toast with real cream, I muttered, opening the little plastic cup she'd brought. None of that powdered nonsense. We sipped and chewed in silence, the kind of silence only old friends can share without discomfort. I heard from Thelma down at the post office, Marlene said eventually. Brittany's been calling around, asking what kind of legal action she can take. She can try, I said, but Harold covered every corner. Marlene grinned. You really went full fortress. I shrugged. I figured I had enough years left to live in peace. Didn't want to spend them being someone's investment plan. You ever think they'll come around? I didn't answer right away. In truth, I didn't know. Maybe Scott would call again. Maybe he wouldn't. But I also knew I wouldn't be the one waiting by the phone. That version of me, the mother who excused, who rationalized, who said yes out of love and let herself be used in return, she'd finally laid herself to rest. I'm not hoping for anything anymore, I said finally. Hope costs too much. Marlene nodded, as if she knew exactly what I meant. And maybe she did. She'd lived her own kind of life. Everyone does, but some of us have paid more than others to stay standing. After she left, I watered the porch plants, refilled the bird feeder, swept the walk. All the little rituals that once felt like obligations now settled into my bones like something closer to joy. In the evening, I received a letter. Not a bill, not junk, not some glossy flyer with promises of fair cash offers. A real letter, in careful handwriting. Grandma, I don't know what's happening exactly, but I know something's gone wrong. Dad won't talk about it, and Mom just says you're being difficult. I don't believe her. You've always been there for everyone. Always. If it's okay, can I come by next week after school? Just me. I miss you. Love, Avery. I held the letter in both hands, reading it twice. My oldest granddaughter, 13, maybe 14 now. The one who used to sit on this very porch and eat popsicles while telling me stories about middle school drama and soccer games. I smiled for the first time that day. A real one. One that came not from victory, but from something softer. She remembered. She still saw me. That would be enough. I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer by the door. And as the sky darkened into that soft purple of early summer evenings, I sat on the porch, listening to the cicadas and thinking not about what I'd lost, but about what I'd kept and what I'd finally taken back. Harold called me 2 days later, his voice warm but precise, like always. "Everything's filed, Virginia. The trust is finalized. You're protected 6 ways from Sunday." I thanked him, though the word didn't feel big enough. What he'd helped me reclaim wasn't just legal. It was personal. Like getting my name back after years of being called just Mom, Grandma. "Can you help with this?" After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table, the light slanting across the wood in that familiar afternoon way. Same view, same chair, same house. But I wasn't the same. I made myself a sandwich, real bread, none of that gluten-free nonsense Brittany once pushed on me, and ate it slowly, deliberately, without my phone or the TV. Just me and the sound of a clock ticking above the sink. I hadn't felt that present in years. Later that afternoon, I walked down to the local hardware store. The clerk, a young man named Jonah, smiled when he saw me. "Back again?" he said. "You're our best customer this month." "Good houses don't maintain themselves," I replied. He rang up my order, just a few light bulbs, some weather stripping, a fresh pair of work gloves, and I handed over my card. My card. Not the one Scott set up for family expenses. That one had been closed last week. This one was mine, tied to my own account. Just the way it should have always been. When I got home, the mailbox was overflowing. Flyers, bills, catalogs, and one envelope. Heavy, expensive paper, my name printed in a typeface far too serious. I knew before I opened it. It was from Scott's attorney. I didn't bother reading every word. The first paragraph was enough. Our clients, Mr. and Mrs. Scott Price, are expressing concern regarding recent changes to the ownership status of the property at 174 Long Hill Avenue. I snorted and tossed it on the table. They could express concern all they wanted. Concern wasn't a legal right. Still, just to be thorough, I called Harold again. He picked up on the second ring. "Let me guess," he said. "You've received mail." They're not subtle, are they? Most people aren't when they realize the golden goose has flown. Do I need to worry? No, he said firmly. The trust is airtight. Their claims got no legs. If they try to push it, they'll find themselves paying a lot of legal fees to get laughed out of court. Then let them try. That's the spirit. We hung up with a laugh, and I realized it had been a long time since I'd laughed without it being forced or short-lived. That night, I pulled out the old box of photos from the closet. I hadn't looked at them in years. Not because I didn't care, but because they hurt. Walter in the garden, grinning in that sun-wrinkled way. Scott, as a boy, muddy from soccer practice. Even Brittany, young and smiling, holding a baby on her hip like it was something precious. They were real once, all of them. I held a picture of Scott at age 10, missing teeth, scraped knees, holding up a Pinewood derby car he'd built with Walter. His eyes were so alive in that photo, unguarded, full of awe. I traced the edges of the picture, then set it aside gently. The boy I raised would have never done what the man had. But that boy was gone, and I had to stop mourning him. I lit a candle on the porch after dinner. Not for anyone else, just for myself. One small flame to honor everything I'd reclaimed, not revenge, not triumph. Clarity. Boundaries weren't cruel. They were sacred, and I had finally drawn mine. He didn't call first. He never did when he wanted something. The doorbell rang just after 9. Too late for a casual visit, too early for an emergency. I knew it would be Scott before I opened the door. He stood there in his dress shirt, sleeves rolled, hair mussed like he'd run his hands through it 100 times. No Brittany, no kids, just him. "We need to talk," he said. "Then talk." "Can I come in?" I stepped aside, but I didn't offer coffee. He sat at the kitchen table like it still belonged to him, like this was just another one of our weekly chats. I stayed standing. "I didn't know you were going to do all this," he said finally, gesturing vaguely, at the trust, the house, the legal wall he'd crashed into. "You didn't ask." His mouth twitched like he wanted to argue. Then he shook his head. "I know you're angry." "No," I said. "I was angry a month ago. Now I'm done. You shut us out. You tried to take what wasn't yours." "I was under pressure," he snapped, and there it was. The first crack. "You think life is easy right now? 2 kids, a mortgage, student loans still hanging over us? And that's my fault?" He looked away. "No, of course not. I just thought you'd understand." "I do understand," I said. "More than you think. I remember the late notices, the empty fridge, your father's medical bills. I've lived tight, but I didn't steal from anyone to survive it." He flinched. "I didn't sign away someone else's roof so I could sleep easier under mine," I added. "You signed the papers," he muttered. "You lied to me," I said calmly. "That's the difference." We sat in silence. He rubbed his temples like he had a headache. I didn't offer Tylenol. Finally, he looked up. "So what now? You just cut us off?" I raised an eyebrow. "What exactly did I cut off, Scott? Access? Control? My bank account? I'm your son. And I'm your mother, not your account manager, not your silent cosigner." His face tightened again. "Do you want me to beg? Is that what this is about? Humbling me?" "No," I said, and my voice was still. "This is about ending the pattern." He stood abruptly, knocking the chair back with a scrape. "You don't know what you've done." "I do," I said. "I've made sure the next time someone calls the bank pretending to be me, they get told to go to hell." He opened his mouth, closed it, then pointed a finger like he might make some final declaration, the kind of grand speech people rehearse in the mirror. But nothing came out. "I hope you find your footing," I said quietly. "I really do. But it won't be on my back anymore." He stared at me for one long beat. Then he turned and left. Didn't slam the door. Didn't say goodbye. Just left. I stood there for a while, the sound of his car fading down the block, and felt something I hadn't expected. Not grief, not guilt. Relief. He was gone. And I didn't feel empty. I felt free. That night, I didn't cry. I thought I might. For years, every tense conversation with Scott left me raw, a pulled thread unraveling in the dark. I used to lie awake replaying our words, wondering what I should have said, where I'd failed him, how I could fix it next time. But there was no next time now. Not in the same way. That rope we'd both held, the one made of obligation and guilt and something too worn out to still call love, had finally snapped. And instead of grief, I felt stillness. I went to bed early. No television, no books, just the hum of the fan in the corner and the faint creak of the house settling, like it knew the fight was over. The next morning, I woke before the sun. My joints ached, but they always did. I stretched, made tea, sat at the kitchen table and watched the light come up over the garden. The same one I'd tended every year since 1973. The roses were thinning, but the lavender was strong this season. I made a list. Not a chore list, not anymore, but a list of what I wanted. Really wanted. Fix the back screen door. Call the library about volunteering. Ask Marlene if she wants to repaint the church benches. Write Avery back. That last one stayed in my mind all day. The letter had been sitting in the drawer beside my reading chair, folded and reread so many times that the crease had begun to wear through. I took it out and held it again, feeling the weight of her words. Not what she said, exactly, but what she didn't. She hadn't asked for anything. She just wanted to come by. After lunch, I wrote her a reply. Neat cursive. My good pen. Dear Avery, of course you can come. I'd love nothing more. We can sit on the porch and have iced tea like we used to. I'll even bake the lemon squares you liked. Love, Grandma. I didn't mention her parents. I didn't need to. The letter went out with the afternoon mail. By dusk, I found myself sitting on the porch, thinking back through all the little moments that had brought me here. Not the big ones. Not the signing of the trust, or the confrontation in the kitchen, but the small, slow turning points. The day Scott first asked for just a little help with rent. The time Brittany said, half laughing, "Well, you're not using your savings anyway." The first Christmas they didn't bring a gift, just laundry. How quietly it had all shifted. How easily love became expectation. How long I'd stayed silent. I thought about Walter and how he'd once told me, "We teach people how to treat us, Ginny. Every yes is a lesson." I hadn't wanted to believe that. I thought love should be unquestioning, boundless. I thought saying yes meant I was strong, that I could absorb whatever they needed. But there's a difference between being generous and being taken. And now, at 80 years old, I finally knew it. I looked around the porch, the fresh paint, the repaired railing, the potted herbs growing in neat rows along the steps. This was mine. My hands had built it. Not for legacy, not for children who saw it as a stepping stone, but for myself. Avery arrived on a Wednesday. She came alone, just as she'd promised. No Brittany's SUV pulling up behind her. No Scott's hovering presence waiting on the sidewalk. Just a teenager with a backpack, a tired ponytail, and eyes that looked far too grown for 14. I watched her from the porch as she walked up the drive, her steps careful, like she wasn't sure she'd still be welcome. But I stood up, opened my arms, and she fell into them without a word. We sat in the shade, 2 glasses of lemonade between us, the plate of lemon squares untouched for the first 10 minutes. She didn't rush to talk, and I didn't push. The wind rustled the leaves above us. The fence creaked slightly, and we listened to the slow rhythm of a house that had finally settled. Finally, she spoke. "Mom's mad," she said. I nodded. I figured. "She says you're punishing everyone, that you're being selfish." I looked at her then, not just as a granddaughter, but as a girl on the edge of becoming a woman, watching everything, learning silently what people will never say out loud. "Do you think I'm being selfish?" I asked. Avery didn't answer right away. "I think," she said slowly, "I think you finally said no." I smiled. "I did. She always says how much you've helped, but only when you're not around. Like, it's a story she tells. not something she thanks you for. That sounds about right. Avery shifted in her seat, then pulled her legs up under her like she used to when she was smaller. Dad's not the same lately, she said. He yells more. At Mom. At us. I felt a pang, but I didn't show it. I'm sorry to hear that. She looked down at her lemonade. Sometimes I think, if you're not going to be around anymore, I should have said something sooner. I didn't want to lose you, too. I reached across the table and placed my hand gently over hers. You didn't lose me, baby. I'm right here. She swallowed, nodded. Good. We were quiet again. Then, out of nowhere, she said, I think I want to be like you. That nearly broke me. Stubborn? I said, trying to keep it light. No, she said. Brave. I squeezed her hand. Then promise me something. She sat straighter. Don't confuse being quiet with being good, I said. Don't let people call your boundaries attitude. And when someone tells you you owe them something just because they love you, run. Her eyes welled up, but she blinked fast and nodded. I won't forget, she said. I believed her. That evening, we made grilled cheese and tomato soup, the way I used to when she was small and afraid of the dark. She slept in the guest room with the window cracked and the breeze fluttering the curtains. Before bed, she placed a note on the nightstand. Thank you for showing me how to be strong. I sat on the edge of my bed later and held the note in my hand. It was a strange thing, to receive gratitude from someone who didn't take anything from me. Just my time, just my love, and who gave it back in full. In that moment, I didn't think about Scott. Not about what he'd done. Not about what he hadn't said. Not about whether we'd ever speak again. I thought about Avery. About what I could still pass on. Not in money, not in property, but in example. If nothing else, I had broken the cycle. And maybe that was the only legacy worth fighting for. Avery stayed through the weekend. She swept the porch without being asked. Helped me deadhead the garden, pulling weeds in silence like it was something sacred. Every night, we sat outside with tea or lemonade, and she asked questions that surprised me. About Walter. About what I was like at her age, about what it meant to stay in a place for 50 years. I answered everything. Not like a grandmother trying to teach, but like a woman who finally had someone willing to listen. On Sunday evening, she packed her bag. Her ride, a friend's mother, someone Brittany had apparently recruited since she was too upset to do the pickup herself, was due any minute. Avery didn't look nervous, just quiet. I'll write again, she said, tightening the straps on her backpack. You better, I said. She stepped into my arms once more, that long, silent hug that said everything we didn't need to put into words. When she was gone, I stood on the porch for a long time. Not lonely, not grieving, just aware, deeply, fully, of what mattered now. I walked inside, turned off the porch light, and locked the door behind me. That next week passed slowly, peacefully. I finished re-grouting the tile in the upstairs bath, rearranged the pantry. Marlene brought over a lemon tree in a pot that we placed by the back steps, and we joked about how long it would take to actually grow fruit. I'm 81 next month, she said. I like to think of it as a race between the tree and my patience. You'll outlive the both of us, I told her, and she laughed so hard she nearly dropped the watering can. On Thursday, I got a letter from the bank. A standard confirmation, mortgage closed, new protections in place, the trust officially recorded with the county clerk. I filed it without ceremony. Then I sat down and started writing. Not a journal, not a letter, a statement, a kind of record, for myself. for anyone who came after. I wrote about the slow burn of being used, not all at once, but piece by piece. How easy it was to give when no one told you it would cost this much. How silence became habit, and how habit becomes a prison. I wrote about the day I realized I wasn't angry at Scott, not really. I was angry at the version of myself that let things slide, that told herself he's just stressed, they're just trying, I can handle it. Because I had handled it for too long, and I had mistaken that for love. By the time I set the pen down, the sun had dipped low, casting long shadows across the kitchen floor. I made myself a cup of tea and watched the light move. I didn't know what the future would bring, whether Scott would reach out again, whether Brittany would ever say the words I once needed to hear. But I knew one thing more clearly than anything else. They could no longer take from me without my permission. And I wasn't giving it. It was a Tuesday when I finally moved the boxes from the attic. Not because I planned to leave, I wasn't going anywhere, but because I needed to see what I'd been holding on to all these years. Old clothes, college textbooks from when I thought I might go back for a degree, broken decorations, Walter's boots, and letters. So many letters. I opened one, yellowed at the crease, and found my own handwriting, shaky and firm all at once. Dear Walter, I'm sorry I snapped today. The faucet's leaking again, and I'm tired. You keep telling me to rest, but you forget how much of this house is held up by what I do when no one sees. I folded it back, gently. That had been the story of my life. What I did when no one saw. Until now. I threw out what didn't matter, donated what might still serve someone else, and kept only what felt like truth. A small stack of photos, a recipe card in Walter's script, Avery's note. By evening, I'd cleared the attic, swept the floor, and opened the window to let the dust drift out into the dusk. That's when I saw Scott's car, parked across the street, engine off. He didn't come out. He didn't have to. Some men only visit their mothers once they can't take anything more from them. Some come back because they're haunted by the echo of who they used to be. I watched for a while. He sat there maybe 10 minutes, then drove off without ever getting out. I didn't wave. Some goodbyes don't need saying. I slept well that night. Dreamless. The kind of rest that only comes when you know nothing more can be taken from you. Not by silence, not by guilt, not even by love. And in the morning, I baked. Peach cobbler. Avery was coming again that afternoon. This time she was bringing a friend. The kitchen filled with warm air and cinnamon, the soft thud of a wooden spoon against a mixing bowl, the kind of sounds that made this house feel alive again, not for someone else's benefit, not as a stage, but as a home. My home. When she arrived, her knock was firm, confident. She stepped inside without asking and set 2 school backpacks by the door. Her friend, a shy girl named Lila, greeted me with a polite, "Hello, Mrs. Price." "Call me Virginia," I said. "No one around here needs titles anymore." They sat at the table pouring iced tea like they'd always belonged here. Maybe they had. Maybe this house wasn't just a shelter for memory. Maybe it was something else now. A place where women learned how not to be erased. We ate. We laughed. We planted herbs out back. They asked questions about Walter, about what it was like in the 60s, about how I knew when to draw the line. "You don't," I said. "You just finally get tired of being crossed." That made them laugh. But I saw it land, too, the weight of it. They were listening. That was the real inheritance. Not the house, not the money, the knowing. By sunset, the girls had gone, leaving the porch light on behind them and promises to return next week. I stood in the doorway a long time after they left. The breeze was gentle, and for once, I felt no ache in my chest, no fear of what was coming next. Just the quiet strength of a woman who'd finally said enough and meant it. If you're reading this and something in it felt familiar, if you've been quiet too long or too generous or too forgiving, I hope you know this. You're allowed to stop. You're allowed to change your mind, your locks, your will. You're allowed to say, "This ends with me." And if you need to hear it from someone who's been there, someone who's lived long enough to know what silence costs, I'm telling you now, it's not too late to take it all back. Your voice, your time, your name. If this story moved something in you, share it. Leave a comment. Let someone else know they're not alone. Because maybe that's how we start to build something new, one no at a time.